So we're all very aware of our five senses, so that's sight, hearing, touch, taste, and smell. But we also have a sense of proprioception along with our vestibular system, and the two are actually connected in a number of ways. But before I get started talking about them, I just need to state that I am not a doctor, I am not a health professional in any way. I am an autistic artist with a YouTube channel, and my thoughts and opinions should be treated accordingly, really. So, with that in mind, let's get started talking about proprioception. Proprioception is basically an understanding or an awareness of where our body or body parts really are in space or within our environments without actually having to look at them for reference. We have sensors throughout our body which contributes to our sense of proprioception or this body awareness called proprioceptors. And these sensors feed information to our brain. So, for instance, if I hold my hand aloft like so, I have an innate awareness of where my hand is within my environment without needing to look at it really. And also, a good test of proprioception is touching the tip of your nose with your eyes closed. Although I have to say I struggled with this a little bit because my finger ends up a little higher than it should. So yeah, it just goes to show really. Kinesthesia is a term that's often used interchangeably with proprioception, but their meanings are actually slightly different. And this article offers a good explainer between the two. Proprioception describes the awareness of posture, movements, and changes in equilibrium, and the knowledge of position, weight, and resistance of objects in relation to the body. Kinesthesia, however, refers to the ability to perceive the extent, direction, or weight of movements. I think a good visual of understanding how proprioception and kinesthesia works in our bodies is when our proprioceptors have been seriously disturbed, such as when an astronaut experiences weightlessness on their travels out in space. And I really like this quote. Astronauts and cosmonauts have reported that on awakening in the dark during flight, they may not feel where their arms are, or if they see a luminous watch dial, they may not immediately realise it's on their own wrist. In autistic people, our sense of proprioception or body awareness can be off, so that some of us are hypersensitive, whereas some of us are hyposensitive. Those of us who are hypersensitive may be extremely sensitive to pressure or movements, and they may well be sensory avoiders. They may experience difficulties with coordination, they are often clumsy, and as a child they may well find it difficult or impossible even to learn how to ride a bike or swim or show any ability when it comes to dance. They may find tasks which involve the use of motor skills really challenging, so they may avoid physical play or sports with other children. Sensory avoiders may also avoid hugs or other types of physical contacts. They may avoid play parks, and they may appear timid when it comes to crowds because they're just not comfortable with standing next to or close to lots of other people. And also, and I think this is really interesting, they may not be able to gauge the size of the small gap between an escalator and the floor because it may well feel like they're going to fall into that gap, or the small gap between the tube and the station floor, because they just haven't got this full body awareness really. And I certainly remember having this real fear. Also, sensory avoiders may display toe walking behaviour in childhood, really because they don't like the full sensation of their full foot on the floor, so they try and minimise that contact. And they may well develop poor posture as a result because they just cannot accurately get a sense of their body. And I've got dreadful posture going on, and as a child I was really uncoordinated when it came to walking. I was often shuffle my feet when I walked. So yeah, this makes a whole lot of sense for me. The proprioception hyposensitive among us may look for sensory seeking activities such as swinging, bouncing on a trampoline or a space hopper, jumping jacks, throwing and catching games, and many of these activities also involve our vestibular system, but more on that shortly. Sensory seekers may well bump into people or objects really easily and can be prone to accidents as they may not risk assess in the same way as those of us who are hypersensitive do. They may show a love of rough play and they might not fully understand why other children just aren't into this really physical rough play. Sensory seeking individuals may also really like deep pressure, such as bear hugs or weighted blankets, and this is no doubt the reason why weighted blankets are often talked about within the autism community. Although I have to say, I really can't get on with them. It feels like I'm being held against my will, and Ian bought me a weighted blanket not so long ago, and I tried it once and I just absolutely couldn't get on with it. I just felt super trapped. The vestibular system is our seventh sensory system, and that's quite difficult to say all at once. And it's located in our inner ear, and it exists to detect our sense of balance and maintain our sense of equilibrium so that we can tell essentially when our head is upright or tilted in respect of gravity. I think vertigo is an interesting condition as it causes sensations of dizziness or spinning, or that your environments or surroundings are somehow moving. And it really demonstrates how well our vestibular system works when it's functioning properly. And I've had vertigo a few times now, or BPPV, and I can't tell you what that stands for, but maybe I'll pop it up here. But it's really horrible, I think, particularly at night, because I would wake up feeling like I was going to fall out of bed. So it's, really quite a distressing condition. And I'm super grateful for my vestibular system for, when it's functioning properly, because that would just be horrendous to have all of the time. As with our sense of proprioception, autistic people can function atypically in regards to the vestibular system, resulting in hypersensitivity or being overwhelmed by movements, or hyposensitivity, where individuals may purposefully seek out intense movements. The vestibular sensory seekers among us may enjoy stimming behaviours such as spinning around, jumping, rocking back to forth or side to side, and they may also enjoy climbing or gymnastics or basically any substantial movements activity. And interestingly, they may appear to never get dizzy, which seems just bonkers to me because I get dizzy so easily. There does appear to be a link between vestibular system hyposensitivity and ADHD, and particularly for those who have ADHD and developmental coordination disorder, which is also known as dyspraxia. And many people with vestibular hyposensitivity feel like they need to constantly move or fidget, though of course this behaviour is seen in many autistic and ADHD people regardless of their vestibular preferences. Sensory avoiders will, surprise, surprise, avoid all of these very active behaviours and, like me, get dizzy really easily. And they may also hate the feeling of tipping their head back, like the hairdressers when they wash your hair, and I've always hated that feeling. So, am I a sensory seeker or sensory avoider? So I am definitely a sensory avoider, and I've been this way throughout my entire life. And to be honest, learning about proprioception and the vestibular system has made so much sense in terms of my own experience of being autistic and sensory issues that I have. I just couldn't understand why I've been just so ridiculously sensitive to movements in my life, to the point where it's just been really embarrassing for me at times. For instance, as a child, I hated swings, roundabouts or merry-go-rounds and slides and climbing frames. Well, in saying that, I would go on the swings, but I would only ever feel comfortable if my feet were pretty close to the ground. So as soon as it felt like the swing had more control over me than I did over it, then I would just absolutely freak out. In fact, I hated the sensation of a swing so much that I broke my leg when I had to scramble off one as a youngster. It was in a pub garden, and we'd basically all snuck in after school, so we shouldn't have been there. And it was a very unusual swing in that basically it was really long. It was kind of like a sort of pirate ship, really. And I've tried to find an image of a swing like it, and I've just not been able to. So I imagine it was just kind of cobbled together by the pub landlords. But essentially, a load of kids just got on the swing, including myself. And as soon as they started moving it, I just absolutely freaked out and just launched myself off this swing because I just hated that sensation. And I enjoy riding a bike, although I did learn how to ride a bike much later than other children, but I absolutely cannot cope with the feeling of freewheeling down a hill. And again, it's this kind of control thing. So I'm kind of fine on a bike as long as I feel in full control, but as soon as it feels like the bike is in control of me, I just can't cope. So it's basically brake, brake, brake all of the way down a hill. So needless to say, I don't get anywhere very fast on a bike. And as an adult, I hate fairground rides such as the roller coasters, the carousel, scramblers, waltzers. And whenever I'd be coaxed onto going on anything, which happens very rarely, needless to say, I was kind of traumatized for hours after. I would just hate that sensation so much. So it didn't really take long for me to be the person who was designated in looking after everybody else's coats and bags while they went off and had a good time. So yeah, I remember lots of times standing around in fairgrounds. So, playground rides and fairground rides are both pretty easy to avoid if you're hypersensitive to these kinds of sensations, but transports, not so much. I've always had real issues with being in cars, and as a child, I would very often go completely mute actually during car journeys, as it would just be so overwhelming for me. And it's so interesting that I can finally make sense of all of this. So, as an adult, I'm kind of fine with driving. I'm obviously fully aware of my own speed, but my spatial awareness is pretty dreadful, I have to say. But other drivers do make me nervous because I, of course, can't gauge their intentions. And as a passenger, I'm not too bad in cars as long as they're going under 30 miles an hour or 30 miles an hour. But I am hyper alert in a car whenever it's kind of going fast, really, and particularly on motorways. And I really panic in the fast lane or being stuck behind a lorry, actually, as well. I'm just hyper vigilant to everything going on. Also, I freak out really easily on buses, and particularly if I'm going to another town on a bus, because it means going through country roads or country lanes, and I'm just convinced it's going to crash. So it just all seems so out of control to me. Listening to music, however, does help with this sometimes because I'm distracting my brain with different sensory inputs, and sensory inputs it enjoys, so it often counteracts all of the other stuff kind of going on around me. And interestingly, if I'm going a short distance on a bus, I always seem to play David Bowie's Space Oddity, because I get really distracted by this song in particular because it's just so multi-layered. It's almost like an aural collage in many ways, because there's just so much going on in terms of production. So I'll spend my time trying to dissect how this song was put together. So sometimes it's not always about the music itself, but I'm kind of exploring what's going on within the song itself, which kind of seems to soothe me at times. And needless to say, I really hate flying too, and I've had meltdowns a few times actually, as I just can't stand anything about it. And the very fact that I'm surrounded by people only adds fuel to the fire, really. And I remember one instance of a work-related trip. I had to go to Ireland with my boss, and I'd been obsessing about this flight for days because I just didn't want to do it. So by the time I got on the plane, I was in kind of like a dreadful state, really, and I was being super vocal about how frightened I was, really. I was just like, the plane's going to crash and all of this stuff, really. So needless to say, people around me were getting really quite concerned. So yeah, it was really difficult. I'm just thankful that my boss was really understanding, because it could have been really quite embarrassing. But I couldn't concentrate for all of the time that we were there doing this kind of work-related trip. So the conference and meetings that I had to go to, I just absolutely couldn't concentrate because I was so worried about the flight home. So yeah, it gets to this extent really where I just really obsess about travel and movements. And also, I should mention, in terms of proprioception, I am super clumsy and always have been, although I suspect it may have gotten a little worse as I've gotten older, and I'm just forever banging into things because of this kind of lack of body awareness, really. And I've broken a number of bones in my body and all kinds of stuff, really. I'm just not fully aware sometimes of the space between myself and an object. And sometimes I almost forget about parts of my body and will very often sit really awkwardly. So I'll cut off circulation, which is probably more to do with interoception, maybe both, but I'll experience pins and needles, and it takes a while to get that kind of circulation going again. I think what's interesting, however, is that as part of my chronic pain disorder, I have peripheral neuropathy, so it's basically pins and needles going on more often than not, actually, in my legs, and I get pain across my shoulders and in my arms and my scalp nerve as well. And although it's horrible, as a slight positive, it's given me more of an understanding or more of an awareness of my body. So I'm, yeah, more in tune with my arms and legs and just my body, really, because of this kind of constant feeling of pain. I'm just very aware now of different parts of my body. So, proprioception and the vestibular system. As an autistic person, are you a sensory seeker or a sensory avoider? Perhaps you've been a mixture of both in your life, because we know that sensory preferences can wax and wane throughout an autistic person's life. And of course, it's possible to be hypersensitive to some sensory inputs while being hyposensitive to others at the same time. So let me know in comments, as I'd love to hear your experiences, because this for me has helped explain so much about my sensory sensitivities. And in all honesty, I haven't seen a whole lot of discussion on YouTube about this. So yeah, I'm just interested to hear your stories. So I think that's going to be it for today. So thank you ever so much for watching, and give it a like if you got this far, and I'll see you again soon.